Welcome back to Peak Havoc Manufacturing. Today we're talking about the Notch X-Max flares once again, but this time we're going to go over what we had to do to install them, how long it took, and how much it cost. And then we're going to talk about the materials and tools that you need to get it done, and whether or not you should buy a set of Notch X-Max flares. The answer is hard to say, so let's get into it. That's a lot, right? You can see that the Notch flare did not come notched correctly. 1,100. Well, bam, we're back. Let's get into it. I think we're gonna get started with how they turned out. At the end of the last video, we maybe didn't cover it so much, so we're gonna take a minute here and take a look at these things and see how they really turned out. So, just a quick recap. They are paint matched to the paint code, whatever stone white is, don't know. We did the exact fit, we painted them, so we did the full install. So first off, the Jeep is dirty. It's been snowing here in Colorado. I've been driving the Jeep every day, and it's a little bit dirty. It might be hard to see on the camera, but it is in fact dirty. So I would say this is the natural resting state for this thing, and the flares match great. You can't tell there's any difference, and honestly, I don't even think in the normal daylight that you can really tell. So paint match, thumbs up. The only thing that bothers me is the way these two rear flares line up. You can see that notch, even if we get back a little bit. So on this one, the door fender sits higher. So it's a little bit of a nitpick detail. Overall, it's not that bad. I still give that a thumbs up, maybe a thumb to the side. The only thing that I really give a thumbs down is this. So we might talk about this later, but you can see that the notch flare did not come notched correctly for the body lines. So this indent should be down a lot farther, and as a result, there's a big hole here. We could have bonded that in, but honestly, I don't see the point. So that's a thumbs down. Next, looking at the front fender, from here it looks good, but if you get kind of towards the side, you can see the gap that is left here. Now, theoretically, you could fill this in with Bondo, but I don't really think it's worth doing because that would be a lot of Bondo. And with how much this fender flexes, it's probably just gonna fall off. So that's kind of a thumbs down. Another thing that I mentioned in one of the previous videos was when I drove it to the paint shop, the fender flares actually collected some rocks, and that's still been happening. So I'm gonna show you what we have here. If you look at the bottom of this inner fender, you can see we're actually collecting dirt and rocks and mud here, which is, in this specific instance, is okay because you can open the door and clean it out, but these ones are gonna do it too. So we intentionally left the bottom open because I didn't want it to get muddy and stay saturated up in here and then cause the actual replacement panel that we did to rust. So that's another thing to keep in mind. That's kind of a big thumbs down, and that has to do with obviously just the fit and finish that we have. I guess I can only really think of two defects that are bothering me now. Oh, actually, three. So here's one. First off, the door is still open, so let's close that. But I don't know if you can see this, but the fender flare goes like this in the rear. If you look closely, you can see there's a dip there, and there's also one on this side. This one might be easier to see. And that's just how they came. So, there's not much you can do about that. You could fill it in with Bondo. I didn't bother to. It's not a big deal. Another defect I had, this one was my fault. We have a spot where the base coat is worn down from the wet sanding, but overall, it's not that big of a deal. You can avoid that if you decide to paint them, or if you have someone else paint them, they probably won't do that. The last piece, and it's been maybe a month or so since these got done, and I've been driving the Jeep regularly. There is a chip that is developed down here. Now, it's on a spot where there's no support. It might have been weak already. I'm thinking what happened was the front tire kicked up a rock and hit that, but also, I'm not sure. I still give them, on the end result, I still give them maybe a 9 out of 10 or so. So let's get into the rest of the video, which is going to be a cost analysis and labor breakdown. We'll get the marker out and we'll start writing numbers down so that you can see what you're in for, or you can see what I was in for. Chris is working in the back over there. Let's get into that. Welcome to the XJ. We're here for the next segment of this video where we're gonna actually break down everything. Hopefully you can read this. Hopefully my handwriting is legible. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just kind of break down the install process by category, and then we're gonna total up the labor, go over what I have into it cost-wise, and then we're gonna make a materials list to see if this is something you should take on or do. So I've broken it down into 7 sections of the install, and then we're just gonna add up. I've already gone through and estimated my labor times. So we're gonna talk about each section in a little bit more depth. I'll put some videos of us doing it, and then we're gonna add up our total labor time. So to get started, we have the prep section. Now the prep section is probably the easiest, so I wouldn't really worry about that one. I give it a 1 hour for high and low, so it's really not that hard. Basically what I mean by prep is assuming you're rolling in a stock XJ, you gotta pull off the fender flares, you gotta take off the bumperettes that are here on the lower quarter, simple stuff like that, take out the wheel liners. Super simple, you don't really need anything for it. As far as the tools that you need for that, just simple hand tools, right? Sockets, ratchets, drivers, some hand tools. This is gonna get messy quick, but hey, it's the best idea I had. The only problem I had with the prep section was I pulled off the lower quarter panel bumperettes and found out they were rusted through, and that swiftly halted my install of these flares until just a couple months ago. So our next section is the trimming section. So I give this between 8 and, oh wow, you can't read that. Between 8 and 16 hours of labor. And basically what I mean when I say trimming is trimming the rear wheel well and then the front fenders just to fit the fender flares and larger tires. That is where you do the re-welding here. So it was about a day or two of work. The only real issue with it is that cutting and welding the rear is actually not that simple and like easy. You have to cut all the spot welds for the rear unibody, which isn't really easy. And then when you try to fold the flaps up, because the wheel well is all curved, it doesn't want to curve up. Kind of hard. It can be hard for an unexperienced welder to do that without blowing through the body. You have to be really careful because the sheet metal on the XJs is really thin. So as far as our materials list, we're going to add a welder and all the supporting equipment for that. So right off the bat, we're on the second section and we need a welder, you need a mask, gloves, everything like that. You need an angle grinder, all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah, well, we'll add that. We'll add a grinder. There's a lot of grinding on here. So that's all good there. So on to the next section, bondoing the rear body. So for this section, I give it about 4 to 6 hours. We got 4 to 6. And basically all this section is just everywhere that you welded on the rear quarter panel, you want to fill that in with Bondo and you want to reshape your body. For the most part, it's simple, but it's not natural. The Bondo isn't meant to really be used for that, right? I mean, Bondo is supposed to fill in small dents and that's it. And instead we're reshaping the rear quarter panels with it, or the wheel wells with it, which, you know, it doesn't really go great. And another thing that they don't talk about in the instructions, there's no paint back there anymore. Because of the welding, when you tack the unibody back together, you've now stripped the paint on the backside. So if you saw at the end of our last video, I actually sprayed an oil back here, and you can get what's called a cavity wax to spray inside panels. And that's kind of your only option. The Bondo needs to completely cover all the bare metal. And if it doesn't, then yeah, you'll run into issues with rusting later. So really, the only material you need for that is Bondo, but that's pretty obvious. So we're not going to add that, right? Because obviously you need Bondo to do Bondo. Okay, the next section is drilling the body to mount the flares. I estimated this to be about 5 to 10 hours of work. This is impossible to do alone. So basically, the way that it works is the studs come sunk into the fiberglass of the fenders, and they stick out maybe 3 inches from the edge of the fender. So you can't rest the fender up against the body because the studs touch the body first. So your fender flare is sitting a couple inches away from the body, and you literally have to eyeball it and hope that you drill the holes right. And then inevitably, when there's some that need to be adjusted, your only option for adjusting is to turn your round hole into an oval shaped hole, and then you can adjust the flare that way. And that leaves you with big holes in your, sheet metal unibody, which is a big thumbs down. And it's kind of just, I think it's a poor way of designing that. The other problem is the flares aren't made symmetrically. So we had a problem where the front 2 fender flares aren't the same. So they're not a mirror image of each other. They're actually completely different sizes. If you set them side by side, you can see they're completely different. So on the front of the Jeep, we actually have the flares set up in 2 different ways because you can't use the same alignment marks because at some point the flares aren't going to match. and the Jeep's not going to be symmetrical. So that's kind of annoying. I say you need 3 people to do it. Definitely 2 at the bare minimum, because someone needs to hold it while the other person marks. For the bigger ones, for the fronts, it's easier if you have 3 people, 1 person holding each side, just to make sure that it doesn't move while you're marking. So for this, you really need a drill. And I guess now that I think about it, you really needed a drill to do the trimming, because some people drill through the spot welds. Anyway, you need a drill for this, and you need some way to mark the holes. It's not easy, because if the flare is here, you can't really mark where the stud sits. And you might think in your head, well, if I throw grease or paint or something on the end of the stud and then touch the body, it'll mark. And while that can be true, not all the studs will touch at once, because the fender flares need to be reshaped and they're not quite shaped correctly from the factory. When you throw it on there, it's possible that there's only 2 out of 6 studs that are actually touching the body. So then you have to work your way through and drill 1 hole at a time. And then the more you take the flare on and off and on and off and reline it up, the higher your chances for problems, because we're all human and we're going to mess it up. So we're going to add friends onto our material list. It is not possible alone, at least in my opinion. I'd like to see someone do it alone. Our next section is the test fit section. I gave this about 5 to 8 hours of work. And what that entails is once you finally get the holes drilled, you actually set the fender flare up against the body, and then you learn how you need to shave the fender flare to get it to fit right. They don't come out of the factory correctly trimmed, so you'll actually have an issue where some of the fender flares are supposed to have indentations for the body lines, and they're missing them. Or in some fender flares, they're in the wrong places, as we went over earlier, and I'll throw some footage of that on the screen right now. So the only reason it's so long just to bolt them on and off is because of how many bolts it is and how hard it is on some of the fender flares. For the door ones, you have to reach into the door pocket, which is hard. You have the whole window regulator in your way. That's difficult. And on the rear quarters, mainly the driver's side, there's reinforcement for the filler neck. So getting your arm in there and getting them bolted on actually takes quite a while. I give it about 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes per fender flare to get them bolted on and off. So that's where the 5 to 8 hours come from. And then, obviously you get it bolted on, you got to trim it with a grinder, and then it's got to go back on. The good news is it hasn't added to our material list. It's just ratchets, hand tools, and a grinder. You can see I was grinding with an angle grinder away to try to add some indentations where I was missing them. Overall, not that hard, just super tedious. And that's a good segue into our next section, which is adding Bondo to the fender flares for the exact shaping. This is the definition of tedious, and I give this about 10 to 20 hours of labor. So right there, we have our biggest chunk of time on installing these flares. The reason why it takes so long to do this section is because 1, you have this same labor because it's got to come on and off, but 2, you have to first tape the body so that the Bondo doesn't stick to the body, and then you have to fill in your gaps with Bondo, and then once you do that, you need to let the Bondo cure for about an hour, right? So you bolt the fender flare on, that's already taken you 15 to 30 minutes. You throw your Bondo on, that's another 15 minutes. And then you have to wait an hour. So now we're at an hour and a half per fender flare. And then once the Bondo is dried, you have to take it back off, and then you actually have to sand them, right? Because the Bondo has to be sanded to be smooth, especially if you're going to paint them and you want them to look good. It needs to be smooth with the rest of the fender flare. That takes 30 to 45 minutes per flare. So it's like 2 hours, give or take, just to do 1 round per fender flare. If you have a friend to help you, which hopefully you do, you can develop a workflow where you guys do the Bondo on maybe 2 or 3 flares. And then after it cures, maybe you go to lunch or something. Then he takes one off, you start sanding it, he takes the next one off, you give it back to him, he's giving you another one, and while he's bolting one on, you're sanding, and you can go back and forth like that. That's what we had to do, and that cut down on the time, and that's how I got this number. So if you're doing this alone, I would, edge on the higher side of this. In fact, I might have this pretty low. I would plan for more if you don't have friends. So yeah, basically that's the biggest pain for the whole install. So let's see, do we need any more materials for that? Nope, just the friends. Okay, now we're gonna get into the next section, which is, kind of wishy-washy for some people. A lot of people aren't doing their own paint, and that's our next section. We chose to do our own paint, so that's gonna add to our material cost quite a bit, and some people don't do that, some people take it to a paint shop. So that's entirely, an option for you, but if you wanna paint them yourself, we're gonna go into that. So we're going to start with the 9 to 15 hours that I estimated to be, which is a lot. And just to kind of break that down a little bit, it's kind of broken into a couple pieces. obviously, you know, you have your prep. So the first thing you have to do is sand the fender flares, just so they can take a primer. And then you shoot your primer. And assuming if you have perfect bodywork, you could just use a sealer and then paint right over the sealer, which will cut down your labor time by a good amount. But we didn't. We used a sandable primer. So we have to shoot the primer, and then mixing, spraying, that takes around an hour. And then the cure time, we gave it 24 hours. So then after that, we got to sand the primer because it is a sandable primer. We got to get the surface smooth. And then from there, we can go and mix our base and our clear coat. And spraying those things only takes, you know, maybe 2 hours total. But what really gets you is the curing time, right? So if you do a sandable primer, you have to wait a day. Well, that's what we did. And then when you shoot base and clear, you need to wait another 24 hours. There are ways to cut down that curing time, but unfortunately we don't have those methods. I'm using yeah, it was definitely a couple hours. But what really got us here, the reason why I say 9 to 15 is all in all, if you have to do any sort of corrections. So if you're not a perfect painter, you're gonna have a problem, right? And then you're gonna have to wet sand that problem out, and then you might have to reshoot base and clear, or maybe you have a problem and you have to start over and start from primer. So we had some problems in our base coat and in our clear coat that we had to wet sand out, and that adds a couple hours into it. So, you know, we're between 9 and 15 hours on it. But what really gets you here is it's not really the time. If I'm being honest with you, the paint probably went smoother than any of this. Maybe that's because we have experience doing that more so than any of this. I mean, the cutting is quick and easy, but the Bondo, the drilling, the Fugazi Fozo holes, the test fitting, it all just kind of comes out of nowhere and you're not used to doing it. But, you know, we've painted before, so the workflow is already determined for us. But what really gets you is the materials. So we do plasma cutting, so we have a really nice dry air setup. And if you don't have that, you can't paint. If you have an old compressor like ours that's spewing a bunch of oil out, or has a lot of condensation on the lines, if you're somewhere humid, you need to have nice, clean, dry air to paint. Otherwise, you're going to spend more time wet sanding and trying again and again and again. So adding on to our materials list for that, you know, we have a compressor. We'll just put comp because I don't have the room. We have the compressor, the spray gun, dryer for the air. And when you start to get into all this stuff, you know, it adds up. A compressor is $500 to $1,000 if you're buying a new one. Our dryer is from Harbor Freight, and that's retails for like $600. Our spray gun, we're just using a Home Depot Husky spray gun, something that's a little bit better than Harbor Freight's cheapest. But either way, you're spending at, you know, probably $50 to $100 on the spray gun. So what we're not going to do here is we're not going to add all the material costs here into our total cost. When we get into the cost section, I'm actually pretty low on the overall investment cost, but that's because I already have all these things. We didn't have to buy anything tool-wise because we already have it. If you're starting from scratch, this project's going to get expensive. Just kind of, you know, just imagine what all this is going to cost. I mean, a welder, I mean, that's a good chunk of change. So hopefully you have all this stuff. If you're not doing the painting yourself, it doesn't really matter if you have the stuff. You're going to pay for it either way. You're going to spend probably $1,000 to $2,000 getting these painted. Maybe less if you have a hookup. But what we'll do now is we'll add up our totals, and then we will go from there. So our total added up for our total labor time, we have 42 to 76 hours. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot. When you really put that into working days, like just take a full 8-hour working day if you were to do it on the weekends. It's going to take you a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, like it took us to get these installed if you're doing everything. Now, you know, you can save some time here and there. Maybe you can get cheap with it, maybe not do the paint, maybe not do the exact fit. There's a lot of people that don't do some of these steps to save time and money. So you could do that. So now we'll get into the cost, and I didn't really add up the cost per section or per material. So what we'll do is we're actually going to just divide this out. So this is going to be completely separate, and hopefully I have the room for it. For the cost, we're just going to write down things that I spent out of pocket for, right? So we're not going to add the cost of any of these materials in here, right? Because it varies so much. If you're going to get a welder, you could get a cheap one, an expensive one. We're not going to get into that. We're going to get into what I spent to get it done, which is going to be fairly straightforward and set in stone. So to start were my flares, right? The flares themselves, I spent, wow, that looks terrible. I spent $714 on my fender flares. About $65 of that was shipping, but the rest of it was the fender flares. So it's about $700 for the flares. And That's not a whole lot. I mean, there's a lot of TJ guys that spend a lot more than that on some steel fenders, and there's a lot of fiberglass things you can buy for more than that as well. So, I mean, overall, I don't think it's a terrible price for what you should be getting. I think it's kind of a high price for what you end up getting. And what you end up getting is stuff that could be made better. You have quality control issues. Maybe that's just mine. Okay, the next thing I bought was Bondo. A couple pints of it, maybe quarts. Total, I spent about $75 on Bondo, which is kind of a lot, kind of not a lot. You can actually buy this stuff in bulk at a paint store and probably save a little bit of money. You can probably buy a gallon of it. So yeah, that kind of adds up, but it's not a huge cost. The next thing I spent money on is the paint. So I went to a local paint shop and had it paint matched, and I spent $245 getting that. I actually already had a lot of the materials for painting. I had the plastic, I had the primer, and a couple other things here and there I had the clear coat. The paint itself was about $130. So just the color match clear coat, 1/4 of it was about $130. The rest of it was supporting materials. And then the only other thing out of pocket I am on this, aside from this stuff, is actually just the welding gas and wire. So we spent roughly $100. And the only reason I put it that high is because at our gas supplier, it's like a $75 refill. And then you have to buy some wire, right? You're not using $100 worth of materials for this, but you have to get the materials, right? So it's about $100 just to get the welding stuff to do that. And that's everything, right? Out of pocket, that's everything I had. And I have the total ready. Hopefully the number is right, but my total, $1,134. That's what I spent in total out of pocket to get the notch flares put on my Jeep. So if you are wondering how long this takes, here's your answer. Okay, now it's time to get a little more serious, and let's answer the question, should you buy the Notch X-Max flares? We've gone through all this stuff. Let's take another look at the Jeep, and let's see what we think. So the Jeep looks good in the sun here, and when we're sitting here looking in the sun, the answer is obviously yes. Yes, yes, yes. Get these flares, put them on your Jeep, they look great. And honestly, if you can swing the money, if you can afford to have a shop install them, 100% do it. They look great, and you don't have to deal with any of that nonsense. Just make sure it's a good shop. I think Notch actually does the installs, so I'm not sure what they charge to do it, if they do still do it, if they ever did it. If it's a reasonable amount, I would just have them do it. Take your Jeep to them. If you live a couple states away, trailer your Jeep to them, have them do it. If you can swing that, and then you'll have an amazing looking Jeep, and it'll be awesome. If you don't have that kind of money and you have to do it yourself, the only way I would do is if you have all the stuff. Everything on that materials list, right? If you have all of this stuff and you don't have to buy any of this, or maybe you just need to buy a couple things, then I would consider doing it. Just keep in mind when you're watching our videos, I believe we are on this end of it, and I do believe that I got this end of quality control. So there's an entirely possible chance that your column won't look like that and it'll actually be lower. So I hope for you that that's the case. But if you don't have a lot of this stuff, if you don't know how to weld, you need a friend that does, who has a welder. If you don't have fab tools, you'll have to invest a little bit to get that done. If you don't have friends, do not buy them. You can't do it by yourself. If you want to paint them on your own, you can. I want to make this clear. I have no professional experience painting. None whatsoever. The closest to professional it gets for me is I painted a car and then sold it. So I don't really think that counts, right? So if you want to learn how to paint, this is a good project for that, especially because of how small they are. Mine specifically was a little more advanced of a project because we had to do that blend. I would not recommend doing something like that on your first time painting. But if you just need to paint the flares, I would go for it, honestly. If you want to get into painting and learn how to do it, check out Paint Society on YouTube. That is entirely how I've learned to paint things. If you don't want to learn how to paint, I wouldn't bother. But if you really care about that fit and finish and that final product like I do, you know, it's hard to say. You're gonna have to take a minute and see if you really want to spend the time installing these things or pay to have it done, because really that's what it comes down to. All of this is subject to change depending on how much you care, right? If you don't care a whole lot, then you're good. I would recommend doing them. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. Hopefully this video is not too long. I was hoping for like a, you know, 10-15 minute video, and I think it's gonna end up being more than that. So I apologize if you didn't make it through all the way. Hopefully I answered any questions you guys have. And if you guys do have more questions on these, let us know. Hit us up, leave a comment. I'll get back to you. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. It's just me today. If you have any interest in our K-Truck, we still have it. We were gonna work on it this week, but the manufacturing side of Peak Havoc Manufacturing is actually pretty busy. So that's why this is our video for this week. And we do plan on doing something with this very soon. Hopefully seeing what's wrong with that motor. So if you guys haven't watched the video on the K-Truck, go check it out. If you enjoyed the video, I'm sorry. If you didn't enjoy the video, awesome. Stick around. I'll give you some more terrible content. That's a lot, right? Oh my God. Okay, let's just. So oh wow, that's not level at all. And if you have a friend helping you compared to the rest, adding on